so you don't have to bring too long answers.
Okay.
So, finance company. Okay.
Choose the position.
Okay, super. Okay. Welcome to the invisible let's do now. Okay. Can go. Yeah. Welcome to the Invisible Heart podcast, where our purpose meets capital and impact goes beyond intention. I'm your host today, I'm Christian Kinkombe, and today we're honored to welcome a guest whose quiet leadership, decades-long commitment to value-aligned investing have helped reshape how we think about finance for development. Joining us is Melchior de Murat, Managing Partner of Puri Pictet Turatini Co. and Limited, Executive Vice President of Blue Orchid Finance, and Vice President of the Pictet Foundation for Development, and a respected member of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Welcome. Melchior brings with him not only deep financial expertise, but also a unique ethical compass rooted in trust, stewardship, and long-term view of impact. Over the years, he has helped steward some of the most innovative approaches to sustainable investing, particularly in the global south and across the African continent. And in this conversation, we will explore what it takes to overcome risk aversion, mobilize private capital for public good, and why Africa, often overlooked, is one of the most dynamic and misunderstood frontiers in impact investing today. So, if you're a fund manager, a limited partner, an entrepreneur, or just curious about how real-world impact and rigorous finance can walk hand in hand, this episode is for you. So let's step into the visible heart together. So, let's start by looking at your personal and strategic background. You have played a pivotal role in several impact finance institutions. What originally inspired your involvement in finance with a purpose, particularly focused on the global south and Africa?
Thank you for your warm welcome. It's a privilege to exchange with you. I had the chance, very long time ago, I would say, in the last century, to be approached by Frank Rosel, who was working at UNCTAD, and you know him, right?
Yes.
And he was looking for a fund manager for managing a private debt microfinance fund. That was his own idea, incubated into UNCTAD laboratory, if I may say so. At that time, I was working for Lombardier, and I was involved in the launch of the Ethos Foundation Fund, which the reason why he contacted me. And to make a long story short, that's how in rejoining the Puri Pictet Turatini in 2000, we decided to co-found Blue Orchid, to capitalize it, to manage it as a startup. It was a very heavy process, long time process to make it a global success that it is now. And that's how I realized how much the private sector can impact development agendas. I experienced the temptation of public money to crowd out the market. And that was the most difficult barrier we encountered at that time to start up with a purely private approach. And to come back to PPT, the Puri Pictet Turatini, which is a classical asset management company investing in listed equity, that's what inspired us to link up our long-term investment in publicly listed companies with an active ownership for impact, trying to help the private sector to partner with potential social entrepreneur, foundation, public donors or investors or DFIs for enhanced impact into their value chain, if I may say so.
Yeah. Okay. So how have your roles at Blue Orchid Finance and the Pictet Foundation influenced your understanding of impact investing, particularly on the African continent, which are the laggards, so to speak, in a global context?
Okay, now at Blue Orchard we experience heavily the high risk of microfinance in Africa comparatively to South America or Asia or even Central Asia. So we were investing very gradually and progressively, in fact. The Pictet Foundation is an academic foundation. We are financing the Center of Finance for Development at the Graduate Institute. With an important angle on microfinance, I have to admit. What struck me the most in my professional experience for Africa is the procurement value chain of our portfolio companies, listed portfolio companies, into fragile context in Africa. RDC, for instance, for copper, cobalt, which is a major issue, and that's where we try nowadays, through some partnership with big public institutions, to propose partnership to our portfolio company to manage better the risk of their procurement chain and to try to progressively make those extractive operation traceable from the mine to the end product, and to contribute, not alone of course, but to more formalizing the artisan mining issue. I'm as well a member of the Swiss Better Gold Association, and we launched a fund, now a very important fund, called Swiss Positive Gold, investing in the Swiss Better Gold, which is an artisan mine, formalized, then being bought by the jewelers, the banking industry, our fund. And our next step should be Africa. We are only in South America so far, so we are looking at Ghana, Tanzania, of course RDC, but it's a bit too early now. But there is a very interesting peace treaty going on, providing potentially security and traceability and formalization. So that could be an entry point for us down the road. So Africa, of course, remains very important, but not as important as other continents in terms of investment, so direct investment so far for a company like us.
Yeah, actually that leads me to the second part of our interview, which is about investing in Africa, strategy, barriers and lessons. So what do you see as a key myth or misperception that still prevent many European fund managers from investing into or allocating capital to the African continent?
Could you repeat, because I'm not sure.
Yeah, what are the
misperceptions?
There's a lot of myth about Africa,
and
there's a lot of misperception. For example, as I told you, I'm coming from the infrastructure industry, and there's a risk premium when you invest in infrastructure in Africa, despite the fact that the World Bank has shown that there's a less default in African infrastructure projects compared to other regions in the world, and yet you pay that risk premium. That's one thing, which I believe is related to myth or misperception. But within the asset management industry, what do you think? I know that Building Bridges was organizing a trip to Kenya last year to also help overcome some of those misperceptions from those who are not already converted like yourself.
No, it's a hugely important market for the private investors, of course. But I believe there is a need of creating more security, better governance in a lot of countries, and fighting corruptions. So I believe that the private sector can play an important role, and Blue Orchard did, but could have made a lot of mistakes in being too enthusiastic about the opportunities. The best successes we managed to make it happen in partnership with public investors, KfW, IFC, for instance. So I think we need really to take advantage of the current shake out of the development sphere to better understand how the private sector can team up with public donors and investors to make it happen.
Okay. What kind of data or due diligence frameworks or even partnership can help overcome this investor skepticism about financial returns in African markets?
It will be, numbers are appealing, of course. So infrastructure, fintech, new digital companies have a huge opportunity ahead. Education, digitalization, and financial services, insurances, education. So that's huge. That's huge opportunities for investors. But again, there is a need of framing it, of making it, of reducing the country risk, the currency risk, and a need of better coordinating between private and public actors.
Okay. Yeah. What sectors or themes across Africa currently excite you the most from an impact or risk-adjusted return perspective? You did make reference to your gold mining fund, but are there other more, let's say, impact investing aligned themes that excite you, even though you are focusing on the public listed companies?
No. If you want to prioritize the most urgent action to be done, extraction, unfortunately, is the most important. There is a clear risk that Africa will be squeezed into a mineral war between Chinese, Americans, and Europeans, and there is a very important need of creating traceable value chain and in tackling informal mining and poverty. So I think that's a priority. It's maybe not the most exciting issue in terms of return on investment, but the impact of tackling that issue is the most pressing. That's why at PPT we team up with IFC and ILO to offer to our portfolio companies blended financing, technical assistance to help them making their procurement chain more resilient and to contribute to that formalization and traceability. I think in terms of impact is the most urgent issue because it involves biodiversity, forest, fighting poverty, water. So I think that's the most urgent target.
Okay, perfect. So that leads us to the third part of the interview, which is where we're going to be focusing on governance and LP relationship and capital mobilization. So what kind of limited partners, for example, you mentioned the ITSOS foundations earlier during our conversation, development for institutional family offices, are, from your experience, most open to African exposure today, and what do you think can help build trust with them?
I think that there is an important need of catalytic capital. I'm the chairman of Catalytic Finance Foundation, formerly Region 20, which was launched by Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes,
that's a very prestigious foundation, and they decided to launch an African fund with a brochure focusing on infrastructure, climate infrastructure. And then the project failed, in fact, and we decided to rethink a bit the foundation and rename it Catalytic Finance. As an example, we received a very important grant from CAFI, Central Africa Forest Initiative, to finance private initiative, private companies linked to reforestation, biodiversity, but with a private spirit, entrepreneurship spirit. It could be grants, could be guarantee, could be quasi-equities. It will depend. Could be very concessionary or less. But I think there is really a gap here between the project, the huge number of entrepreneurial ideas around the core topics of African future and education, biodiversity, extraction, gold, you name it, and the capital market. There is a gap there, and the more we can have that type of catalytic financing, the better.
Okay, perfect. Then, how do you ensure that these funds that you're involved in, when it comes to governance, investment committees, or ESG oversight, align more with long-term impact integrity? There's been a lot of discussion, particularly not so much with impact investing, but even within impact investing about greenwashing, SDG washing, impact washing. How can we protect the impact investing approach that keeps its integrity?
For me, it's a challenging question, because I think a company without impact will fail very easily. So could be that impact lens is a little bit dangerous. It could push us into a corner. So there are fragile context, huge inclusion issues, poverty gap, which needs entrepreneurs to solve it, potentially catalytic capital, public capital. But reducing impact too much I think is dangerous. Nestlé has a huge impact on agriculture. They launched a Coffee for Peace in RDC, which lasts through the war, and it's a very powerful project. It's a 40 million capex project for Coffee for Peace. We were involved as a shareholders in the creation of that project, as a long-term engaged shareholder. Nestlé somehow is an impact company. If not, Nestlé would disappear down the road. So I think we need to be a bit careful with that very sexy label of impact. Every investor should look at the impact of its portfolio depending on its risk appetite. If he can only invest in a big cap like Coca, Nestlé, should look closely at the impact of those companies into society, because the more impact they will have, the better they will produce shareholder return down the road. So I think we should be a bit careful with that buzzword somehow.
Okay. As you know, one of our target audience groups are aspiring or emerging fund managers. So I don't know, from your experience, if you can share a little bit about the issue of navigating fund domicile decision, Luxembourg versus Switzerland, Switzerland versus Mauritius, for vehicle targeting the global south and Africa specifically. Do you have any advice on that regard? Okay. Because it's not the same price you're paying to set up a fund in Luxembourg versus Mauritius.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not really an expert on those legal issues, but Luxembourg is potentially the best place to distribute, to fundraise. And Mauritius has a lot of advantages for pouring funds into Africa. So I think
I've seen the Swiss Sustainable Finance Report. Surprised to see that almost all Swiss funds are registered in Luxembourg, and very few, if any.
Swiss funds unfortunately are not competitive, and the Luxembourg funds are very easy to distribute, even outside Europe, in South America, in Asia. So that will be the best structure. But Mauritius offer advantages in terms of investing in Africa.
Well, now comes a very important part, because as we talked about before the interview, I've just come back from Rome, and you have also just been in Rome. So we're going to talk a little bit about faith, ethics, and measurable impact. So, given your connection with faith-based institutions such as the International Committee of the Red Cross or philanthropic organizations, how do values shape your investment decision-making process?
Okay, so we are long-term investors, really looking at the value creation of a company, of its sustainable competitive advantage, which for sure push us to look at impact, sustainable impact, at the big, at the way big corporates are integrating the mega secular trends we are facing, climate change, digitalization, demography, which is incredible. We spoke about microfinance, but the emergence of a middle class from the base of the pyramid is a mega trend. The aging of population in the Western countries as well. So we are, by definition, we are looking at that. Then we believe that the classical ESG approach is a little bit weak. It's important for the boards to understand that there are investors looking at those aspects and to push boards to raise the pole every year in terms of managing sustainability risk, I would say. But I think that the religious funds in Europe, I think it represents about close to 1 trillion. If you look at the Catholic funds, the Unitarians, and other Christian funds, pension funds, endowment, foundation, represent quite an important part of the capital market and of the shareholders by definition. So we are looking with very close attention to the social doctrine of the church, doctrine sociale de l'Église. We were invited to exchange on the conception of mensual bonum, which is a very important paper. First time, the Muslim adopted for years, for centuries, strict investment rules, which makes a lot of sense, in fact. And the Christian never. So first time we have a paper called Mensual Bonum. Jean-Baptiste de Françu, the former chairman of the Vatican Bank, was in charge of writing down the recommendations, which are mainly focusing on you are long-term investors, show your face and open a dialogue with companies for impact, for common goods. So today, with the difficult period ESG and impact is facing due to the sudden change in the US administration, it's very important to listen to the voice of the faith-based investors, which is much more long-term, which is not looking at greenwashing, and which will build up long-term, I think, a stable way of looking at those issues. And the fact that the new Pope adopted the name of Leo XIV as a successor of Leo XIII is very important. And for the small story, do you know that Rerum Novarum was somehow conceived in Fribourg, l'Union de Fribourg, so, launched by a Fribourg Swiss priest called Mermillot, who became a Cardinal Mermillot, who somehow, it's a long story, but inspired the first paper on capital and society, Rerum Novarum, which is inspiring the new Pope. And I think it's a very good news for the investment community, whatever Catholic, Christian or Muslim they are, is that the Catholic Church will keep thinking through the lens of the social doctrine to the huge issue of poverty gaps, of working condition, inequality, to the poorest of, look at artificial intelligence. In fact, they are now relying on underpaid work in emerging countries. Nobody's speaking about that yet, but it will come. So it's quite important to have that voice. And at PPT, we are looking at that carefully, and we are engaged. We are organizing conferences with faith-based driven investors around those themes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. We made 2 conferences in Fribourg.
Oh, really?
And the pension fund of the diocese is one of our key investors for Gold Fund.
Oh, really?
They are very much impact driven. They are pushing the ball forward, and we are launching a small retail fund, balance fund called Mensuram Bonam, to help people who wants to invest a global balanced portfolio with an active engagement for impact. So we are following that very closely, and I think it's good news for all of us.
Great news.
Yeah.
It's pity we didn't invite you for our Faith and Impact Conference in Rome. You would have been a great speaker. Okay, second last question. So what internal metrics or frameworks do you use to track real-world impact beyond financial performance? Again, I know that Peter, you are more into the, let's say, the publicly listed companies, but do you have specific frameworks that you use, or even frameworks aligned to faith that is also being developed little by little?
No, of course we have, you know, our funds are Article 8 or Article 9, so we have to address those frameworks.
Yeah.
We are buying the big database like ISS and others to better understand our portfolio companies. We have the luxury to override them sometimes because those agencies are quite slow to react, to adapt. And sometimes we believe we have a bit more information and more reactivity than those agencies. But nevertheless, we are using those data. ESG and impact is a it's a data-based business. It's incredible. It's a bit too much, in fact. But we are always looking at the sustainable competitive advantage of companies. So sometimes we are overriding some of those ratings because we believe we understand a bit better the company. And then when we are identifying dilemmas, fragilities, risk in terms of sustainability, long-term sustainable business model of our portfolio company, we are engaging. And we try always to highlight gaps and provide recommendations, including partnerships, SDG 17, as you know. And the portfolio companies, you believe it or not, are very interested to listen to us because they want to do more. They know they can do alone. And if we come with concrete partnerships with foundations, with DFIs, they like it, and quite often they are following our recommendation and developing some project after our recommendation.
Okay, that's great, thanks. And finally, I know you have already alluded to that in some of your earlier answers, but what advice would you give to the next generation of general partners hesitant about investing in Africa, and or what mindset shift is most needed so that Africa can get a higher proportion of external resources flowing around the globe?
I think two angles should be put in priority. First, education, and through Blue Orchard, I observed some very, very interesting initiative of education for the poorest. Through very up-to-date digital solutions, low-cost education, private education. I believe that governments should not prevent private initiative in education, but they should really control, regulate the private initiative in education. Higher level, macro level, in order to have a free competition between private and public education. But that's a huge market, very strategic. And women entrepreneurship. My wife is Senegalese, so I know quite well those issues. And those women's group are so powerful in terms of distributing, developing new initiatives, adopting new technologies through very important micro level. I think looking at women entrepreneurship is quite important. And as I told you, unfortunately, extraction should be a priority for both public and private investors to make sure that we succeed in the secular trends energy transition, digital revolution, but without destroying the planet. Can you imagine the Congo Basin destroyed just for extracting coltan and copper and cobalt?
Yeah.
So whatever the energy transition will be a failure. So there is a common interest both for the Chinese and the American to make it happen properly. There is a huge need of teraton of new minerals for at least the next 15 years. That we should look at that very, very carefully, and there will be a lot of public money around that and a lot of private interest.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of today's conversation with Dr. Melchior de Morat, a voice of reason, wisdom, and quiet conviction in the world of values-driven investing. From Geneva to East Africa, from the halls of financial institutions to the front line of humanitarian impact, Dr. Melchior reminds us that investing isn't just about capital, it's about character, it's about commitment, and it's about cultivating trust in places often deemed too risky. We hope his insight inspires you, whether you are an aspiring general partner and limited partner exploring frontier markets, or simply someone who believes that finance should serve humanity, not the other way around. Thank you again, Dr. Melchior, and for sharing your journey with our listeners and for helping to light the path forward. Now, stay tuned, because in our next episode, you'll be joined by an inspiring Alice de Tonac, co-founder and co-CEO of SeedStar, from building one of the world's most vibrant emerging markets startup ecosystem to backing bold entrepreneurs across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Alice is redefining what inclusive innovation looks like. You don't want to miss it. Until then, keep listening and keep investing with your invisible heart. Thank you so much. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Bravo. Well
That's a
done.
wrap.
Well done.